I thought I'd just do a quick introductory video about clay itself. So there's so much new terminology with clay, as with all new and exciting things, but we'll just cover through some of the basic terms and what to consider when you're looking for clay for yourself. So there are three sort of types of clay. I've only got two to show to you, but we've got earthenware and stoneware. So earthenware is it's a low fire clay. It's typically a red colour, so terracotta is a type of earthenware, and there is various colours and types of it around the world, but the main characteristic of it is that it's generally a brown colour, and if you fire it too hot it will start to blister. Earthenware is a lower fire clay, so it's best for sort of plant pots and non-functional objects. Because it has to be fired at a lower temperature, it's generally not as strong as stoneware, but it's a lovely clay. It's usually cheaper than the stonewares, and also because you're firing it lower, it's cheaper as well. So you just need to be mindful of, if you're using the community kiln, of the final temperature that your earthenware is going in at. But so this is an example. This is Southern Red, so I get this from Waikato Ceramics, and this is a mixture. It's 50% South Island clay and 50% North Island clay. It's all 100% New Zealand clay. And it is like really lovely and soft. It's got a tiny bit of, I don't know how much you can see, but it's got a tiny bit of sort of sandy residue in there, but overall it's like a lovely, soft, nice clay. And the terracottas usually are really lovely. They won't generally have much grog in them. So grog is like, it's sand, or it is smashed up tiny little pieces of bisque pottery, and that just helps to give your clay a bit more structure. So a smooth nice clay with just tiny little particles of sand that doesn't have much grog in it, and it's lovely to work with. So that is earthenware in its raw squashy form. This is it in its bisqueware form, and this is it in its fired form. So we'll talk about those differences in a second. So this is an example of stoneware. This is white stone. This is my favourite clay at the moment. I use this to make tiles, small sculptures, platters, things like that. This is a good clay. You can see, again, it's much harder to squash. This needs a bit of water in it, but you might be able to see there's small flecks of white in there, which I guess is where it gets the name white stone from. This is 100% Waikato clay, that comes from mine tailings from a from a mine somewhere up in the north of the Waikato, and it's the little specks of white in there, and the fact that it is a much denser clay, it's harder to work with, but that gives it good structure. So you wouldn't want to use something that was very soft like this for making large sculptures with. You could get away with small sculptures, but for bigger work you do want something that has a little bit of grog in it, and those larger chunks of white indicate that it's like a stronger clay with a bit more grog. And this is quite a high fire clay actually. This can go up to, very happily, up to 1300 degrees, which is very, very hot for your kiln. You wouldn't fire it that hot normally because it just ruins your kiln elements. White stone's an excellent sculpture clay, and it can go very high, and it's a very, very, very strong clay once it's fired. So that's it in its raw state. So this is raw stoneware. This is it when it's bisqued, and this is it just fired with a clear glaze over the top. So you can really see the variation in the colour of the clay. So definitely don't expect your clay to be turning out as the same colour as when you throw with it. So that is just kind of raw. So there are different stages of drying we shall cover. So we've got, obviously your fresh clay. We've got leather hard greenware. So greenware means that the clay hasn't been through any of the kiln yet. So no matter how wet or dry it is, it's always referred to as greenware. So this is leather hard. So this is the same type of clay. You can see already that the colour is starting to change. So in order to determine that something is leather hard, when you feel it, it doesn't feel kind of moist. So it feels a little bit like a sort of soft, nice leather belt would. And if they've got wet leather hard and dry leather hard, this is kind of in the middle. And if you were to scratch it with something, it would leave kind of a clean line. So if you were to scratch your dry clay, it scratches a lot more easily, and it would leave like a little bit of a raggedy line depending on what you're scratching it with. But your leather hard clay is so leather hard is a nice time to apply slips and underglazes, which they're effectively sort of like acrylic paints for your clay, and they are made of coloured stains mixed with water or some other type of medium, and you paint them on, and it acts like coloured clay, and it creates patterns and stuff on your clay. And so here, this mug, this has been painted with underglaze and then carved back and then fired. So underglazes are a good way to get really clean, vibrant colours into your clay. Anyway, leather hard. Leather hard is a good time to, this is too dry right now, but when it's a wetter leather hard, it's a really good time to work with your slabs to create boxes, to attach your different parts of clay together, to add on handles for your mugs, to trim your clay. When you're trimming your pots, you want to wait till it's dry, like a medium leather hard state. We'll talk about trimming in another video. And then the other stage of your greenware is bone dry. So at the point of bone dry, I don't know what this is, I think it's like a mushroom that my son made anyway, he won't mind if I snap it. At the bone dry stage, your clay will feel it'll feel warm to the touch. So when there's still moisture in it, it will feel cool to the touch. And when it's bone dry, it'll be warm. And once you feel it and the clay feels warm, there's no coldness in there, then you know that it's able to go in the kiln. It's dry enough to go in the kiln. Bone dry clay will just snap very easily and cleanly like that. If you try and snap this piece of wet clay, you have to really pull it apart. And leather hard clay is somewhere in the middle. It'll snap cleanly, but it will snap in a sort of soft way, like a Kit Kat that's been sitting in the sun for a while. Bone dry clay is very crumbly. It will just sort of break apart, and you can't really do anything with bone dry clay. You don't want to add any moisture to your bone dry clay. If you put slip or underglaze on bone dry clay, it will crack for sure. Because the moisture that you're adding in is being added in an uneven way, and it's going to create structural weaknesses in your clay. So you want to do all your work at the leather hard stage, and then you put your pot aside and just leave it to dry until it hits bone dry. And then once it's like this, then you can load it into the bisque kiln. So once you've made your pot, you leave it to dry, and then you bisque it. So it goes in the kiln, and generally between 900 and 950 degrees you'll put your pot in. So when you're loading the kiln for a bisque kiln, it can be, all the pots can touch each other, that's fine, they're not going to stick. They can be stacked quite tightly as long as they're nice and dry and they're not going to impair the movement of the object in the kiln. So from this stage to this stage, you can expect your clay to shrink about 10 to 15%. The supplier that you buy your clay from will usually say what the shrinkage rate is, and if they're amazing, they'll say what it is at different temperatures. So, but yeah, allow a good margin of about 10% for shrinkage. And if you're trying to throw a pot to fit something else, like a lid, like a keep cup to fit a silicone lid, or a teapot to fit the teapot lid, or anything like that, if you're trying to make a pot that will fit another thing into it, then you want to do your tests, make a ruler out of clay, mark the centimeters, and then fire it and see what happens, like how big it is once it's been fired, and that will give you your shrinkage rates for your particular kiln, because obviously it is not an exact science. Everybody has a different kiln depending on where you put your pot in the kiln, and whether your kiln sort of overfires or underfires, or there's a brisk breeze, it's a freezing cold day. All that will affect the outcome of your pot. So yes, so you put your pot into the kiln to 950 degrees, and then you take it out. So it's always a slow process. Your kiln will slowly reach temperature. For a bisque firing, you fire at a much slower rate. So I believe it's about standard to fire at about 80 degrees an hour for it to get hotter, 80 degrees every hour, until it hits 950 degrees, and then it will just slowly cool down. So a kiln is just a very, very well insulated sort of oven with the capacity to get much hotter than your kitchen oven. It's just a well insulated box, so it'll crank up to the top temperature, and then just the insulation and the kiln shelves and the pots themselves will hold that heat until it slowly seeps out. So in my kiln it takes 3.5 days from start to finish for a bisque firing. In a smaller kiln it might take less time, in a larger kiln it might take longer. It all depends how tightly stacked the kiln is as well, because your pot creates thermal mass, that the heat resides in. So once you've let your bisque kiln cool down, you open your bisque kiln, you unload it, and then you glaze your pots. So it is standard to do 2 firings. You can do a single firing for sculptural work, or I know a couple of potters. I think Simon Leach does single firings often. He'll glaze his pots while they're raw and then put them in, but I've never had any success with doing that. So personally I would just do the double fire. It gives you the best results. So what happens when your pot comes out of the bisque kiln is that it's very kind of dry and porous. I don't know if you can hear that. But if I put water on this, the water will just immediately absorb into the clay. It's so dry. And so glaze is, you buy it, if you're buying your glaze, you buy it in a box as powder, generally. You can buy it liquid as well. And you add water to the powder and then give it a good stir, and then you can paint it or dip it onto your piece of bisqueware, and the water will immediately suck up and leave the glaze particles on the surface of the pot, so that when you put it in the kiln it will all stick on until the glaze has melted. So you glaze your pots. I'll do a video on glazing as well. You glaze your pots and then you load them back into the kiln. So for a glazed kiln it's very important that you don't have any glaze at all on the bottom of your pot. The glaze will melt onto the kiln shelves, and kiln shelves are very expensive, and you do not want to get glaze onto your kiln shelves, because if you get any in, it will start to and you don't grind it out, it will start to eat into your shelf. Every time you fire it will eat deeper and deeper and deeper, and it will ruin your shelves. And for a kiln shelf about that sort of big, you're looking about $300. And my kiln has 15 shelves, so it's not something that I want to be replacing regularly, So you don't want your glazed pot to be touching any other pots. You don't want it to be touching the back of the kiln. You don't want the glaze to be on the bottom. If you're working with glazes that you're very comfortable with, that's fine. You'll know their properties and you can go down as low as you need to. If you're experimenting with new glazes or doing lots of layering, then you want to leave a good chunk of clay at the bottom of your pot, so to allow for any runs. You can see here this one's run down a little bit, so that as the glazes get layered on top of each other, they get thicker obviously, and they will react differently with each other, particularly at higher temperatures. The glaze will become very, very liquid and runny, and you can have a big mess on your hands. So you always want to leave yourself, particularly when you're working in a community kiln, you always want to leave yourself a good chunk of space at the bottom of your pot to allow for any runs. You can also make sacrificial tiles, like just a bisque tile, and then you can put your pot on top of it, and then it will prevent it from running onto the kiln shelf, hopefully, although I've had lots of issues anyway. So glazing, yeah. So you apply your glaze. Your glaze will look super different when it's been applied to your bisqueware than when it comes out. So don't even worry about it. Yeah, the way you're putting it on is not how it's going to come out. It's going to come out radically different. So yeah, don't stress too much about that. Just be free to experiment. And then once your glazed pot comes, so you're glazed to about 1200 degrees. I mean, anywhere from, so for earthenware, you'd want to do probably an 1100 for this guy, an 1100 degree firing. For stoneware, I'd say that was too low. Your stoneware won't be properly vitrified, which means it will still absorb water into the clay body and is therefore more likely to crack if it goes outside. And it will just be weaker, and you're not going to have amazing glaze results. Most glazes start to come to life when the kiln gets hotter and mixed together. So it's very difficult to get amazing glazes on earthenware. You need to buy special low fire glazes for that. So I personally fire my kiln at 1180 degrees, and that overfires. So I think it's probably more like 1220 that it's cooking at. But anyway, your clay manufacturer will have a guideline of firing temperatures for your pots as well. And also the higher you're firing, the more shrinkage you're going to have in your pot. So you should just be aware of that too. Anyway, so you apply your glazes, and they will come out, however you've applied them. I don't know if that's working there, but you'll come out with very interesting results if you've layered up your glazes and if you're using nice reactive glazes. This is just a satin white glaze and just a matte pink glaze on the inside, so you can get some pretty cool flat outcomes as well. But anyway, that's what a pot looks like when it's been fired. And again, that pot there has just been fired. I've done underglaze in the greenware state, and then I've put clear glaze over the top, and it just makes the underglaze sort of shinier and easier to wash. If you are not happy with your glazed final pot, which, happens to the best of us, it can be very discouraging to get these hideous pots out, and you think, oh, I put so much work in, did everything right, and I've just got this yuck glaze. There's a few things you can still do to that pot. So you can apply glaze again to it and refire it. So if it's a flat thing, like a tile, that's easy enough. You just chuck the glaze on and then put it back in the kiln. It won't absorb in the same way at all. It will just sit on the top, but once it's in the kiln, it will all melt together and you can get a good result there. You can try and just put the pot into the kiln again and fire it hotter. You can take it to a gas kiln. So there's 3 different types of kilns. There's gas, electric, and wood. Well, there's lots of different types of kilns, but the main ways of firing your pots are using electricity, gas, and wood. And so we have electric kilns at the community shed. Gas, however, can provide you very different results to electric, and wood will also give you different results. You can pop it into another specialty firing. You can use luster. So gold luster is like so wonderful. I'll just grab this head here to show you. There you go. So I don't know if you can see very well, but the her little headpiece here, that's got gold luster on it. And that can really like elevate a pot that has, you know, that you're not completely happy with. Luster's fun. That comes in, you can get copper, palladium, which is silver. You can get sort of lilacs and reds and blues. You can get all sorts of interesting metallic lusters, opal, pearlescent. And so a luster firing is a 3rd firing. You do it after the glaze, and you fire it to about 650 degrees Celsius. We're in New Zealand. And the luster, the sheen of the luster will pick up whatever the sheen of the glaze is underneath. So if you put luster onto a matte glaze, it's going to come out matte. If you put it onto a glossy glaze, it will come out glossy. Your gold will be matte or it'll be glossy. Personally, I prefer glossy, so yeah. So you can luster, you can get china paints, that's also an overglaze, and like paint little pictures over the top. You can splodge some oxides on. You can do all sorts of things to try and rectify an ugly pot that you don't like. If you're applying glaze to a vertical surface like this, it's not going to want to stick. So you need to either spray your glaze with hairspray. In my experience, the like cheapest, crappiest hairspray is the best. So those like big bottles of budget hairspray that you can buy for like $2, that's the best. And it just provides a bit of a sticky surface, and you can apply your glaze afterwards. Otherwise you can heat your pot up. So you can put it in the oven, in your home oven, and warm it up, and then once it's warm, the glaze will stick much better to it. So I think heating it gives you better results. But if you don't want to heat it, you can't be bothered, you're not in a place where you can do it, then just try a bit of hairspray and see if that works for you. Otherwise you just smash it up and make a mosaic, I guess. But it's a shame to smash up a pot that's completely structurally perfect, with good weight and good shape and all that kind of thing. I think it's better to try and experiment with other finishes. And, alternatively, maybe you just need to manage your expectations. So things will never come out of the kiln the way that you expect them to, generally. And other people, you have a vision in your head of how your pot is going to look, and it's never going to work that way. So, if you show your pot to other people, maybe they will love it because they don't have any expectations about it. So if you just kind of, reframe your thinking about the pot and try and look at it with fresh eyes, or just give it to your mother-in-law for Christmas, there's no need to just weep tears of sadness if your pot comes out and you're really disappointed, because it happens to everybody. Pottery full of disappointments, but also full of amazing excitement. Sometimes you get things out of the kiln and they're just, you didn't think they'd be any good, and they're just epic. They've come out so cool. So you never know, just have fun and experiment. And all right, well, thank you for your time.